Welcome to episode 3 of Data U, a Laker-led dive into student surveillance. I'm Sarah DeVito here with my research partner, Naya Davis, and today we'll be discussing who has access to student data and what they can do with it. First, let's chat a little bit about FERPA, a policy created to promote student privacy. Can you tell us a little bit more about it, Naya?
Of course. So, starting off with FERPA. FERPA stands for the Family Educational Rights and Privacy, and it is meant to protect the rights of students. So in an interview with SUNY Oswego's Associate Provost, Dr. Ramin Mohammadi, he discusses FERPA and what qualifies as students being protected by FERPA, especially on SUNY campuses, including obviously SUNY Oswego. He says that FERPA qualifies for all students in the US, including international students. If there is a court order, it doesn't matter what category the student is in, they have to be there is going to be a subpoena. There are two categories within FERPA of what is protected and what may not directly be protected. So the first category is directory information, which can provide emails such as a student's name, insurance, their phone number. Unless it is expressed that the student doesn't want information to be shared, then the school is not allowed to share it. And it's basically any credible information to provide that the student attends the institution. And then we have our non-directory information, which includes the student's course information and the student's course information and anything else that has to do with their academic assignments and work, which is protected by FERPA. So he emphasized that this does not apply to students' published work in journalistic context, which there have been a lot of current event situations where students have been releasing their journalistic work, and we now know that that is not protected by FERPA because it is now open to the public. Here is more of what Dr. Ramin had to say.
There is no qualifier on FERPA, so it applies to all people who are in the U.S.
International students as well.
International students as well, of course.
Can educational records for international students be subpoenaed or accessed by government agencies more easily than those of domestic students?
If there's a court order or subpoena, then it doesn't matter what the category the student is in.
Mm-hmm.
Absent a court order or subpoena, there are a number of exceptions to FERPA that we allow, or we have to. I think in my email to you, I explained that SUNY Oswego is accredited by many national and international organizations. So we're accredited by ABET for engineering.
Mm-hmm.
Well, ABET has to make sure our graduates meet the outcomes that are required for engineering. If we don't provide them with all the details, not just their grades, but the actual details of how they did on a project, how they did on various exams that relate to the outcomes, they will not be able to assess whether or not our students meet the expectations.
Okay.
So there are instances where we can provide those details, but in the context of ICE or really any other federal agency that may be interested in our students, they are only entitled to directory information. So I'm going to explain what that means. So you're a student at SUNY Oswego, as an example. If the registrar's office is called and say your insurance depends on your enrollment, then part of the directory information enables the SUNY Oswego's registrar to tell the person on the phone that yes, you're a student at SUNY Oswego. But non-directory information, like your course schedule, is totally protected by FERPA. So I just want to delineate, we consider some things directory information and some things non-directory information. So the fact that you're a student at SUNY Oswego, unless you explicitly tell us you don't want that information given out without your permission, is going to be shared on the phone, as an example. We don't necessarily publish a list of all of our students on our website,
Yeah.
but if that call comes in
Yeah.
with that type of a legitimate request, then our task is to say yes. Because if we don't say yes, you will lose your insurance. If your parents claim that you are a student at SUNY Oswego and a dependent and so forth and so on, and that's why they get to keep you on their insurance.
Yeah.
If we don't admit the fact that you are, so that's why some things are directory or considered to be directory information. But if you choose you don't want any of that to be shared, then we actually stamp your records in a manner where nothing will be shared. But non-directory information, your grades, your course schedule, all of that are not things that we can share with the exceptions I articulated. But those are very clear exceptions.
Okay.
So, give you a totally different example. You're a student at SUNY Oswego. I am in charge of undergraduate education at SUNY Oswego. Now, is there a legitimate reason for me to look at your academic record? If there is, even I am allowed to look at your academic record. But if I'm just curious, I would be violating FERPA if I look at your academic record. Hopefully that's coming across right. That as long as I have a legitimate reason to look at a student's academic record, it is part of those exceptions where you don't have to give me permission for me to do it. To do my job, I have to. I did not, for example, look at your academic record because that you interviewing me is not a legitimate reason for me to go and look at your academic record. On the other hand, if I'm working with your advisor on a particular concern they have and they are seeking advice on what to do about your situation, then I have to look at your academic record. So that's a bit more subtle because the permission may be there for someone like me to look at anything I need to. But really the law doesn't provide for me to look at anything that I want to. So someone who works in the registrar's office, their neighbor is an uncle of someone at SUNY Oswego. And the uncle is wondering, how's she doing in her classes? Well, that person in the registrar is not allowed. I mean, they have the ability to, but they're not allowed to go look up that information and tell the uncle what the student's grades are. So even in the context where we say, well, to do your job, you can access students' records, then the so-called non-directory information. Even there's an ethical assumption in it that we give you the permission to do it. That doesn't mean you should be doing it for these other reasons that are really not appropriate. They're certainly not part of your job. Answering a student's uncle about how they're doing at Oswego is definitely not part of your job.
Yeah. So someone can do it, or I guess a staff or faculty, they can do it if they wanted to, but that doesn't mean they should. So does that mean that it's not recorded when there's a legitimate reason to look at a student's record?
Well, that's part of the difficulty with the systems as they are. So given my position, I can look at just about any student's academic record, just because of my position. Now, your advisor in your graduate program doesn't have the same privileges. They could look at yours, but not everybody at SUNY Oswego.
Yeah.
So there are controls built into the system to limit what people can do. I mean, just naturally built into the system. But that doesn't necessarily mean you can control my ethical behavior with this computer system.
Yeah.
I hope the difference is clear. There are thousands of students that I have to be able to look at their records. But I only should be doing that if and only if it is necessary for me to accomplish my job. So I gave you the example. I'm in charge of undergraduate education at Oswego, but if your advisor in the graduate program is dealing with a particular aspect of your situation and is seeking advice, well, I can only provide that if I see what the situation is. Without it, I can't really help them.
Yeah.
And I'm supposed to help them. So that's how you trying to understand, well, what does it mean I need access and look at information about someone that is appropriate from a FERPA exception perspective. Well, hopefully the examples I gave make some sense. That shouldn't answer the uncle. Definitely shouldn't answer ICE just because they ask. So they come into my office and say, we need to know where so-and-so is. I'm sorry. Do you have a subpoena? Do you have a court order? If you can provide that, then we're obligated to answer that question. But just walking into my office definitely does not obligate me to provide that detail.
Yeah, for sure. And the student-generated content stored on learning management systems like D2L's Brightspace, does that include non-directory content?
Absolutely. So this is one of the reasons I pointed out what we do for ABET was just that, because that is non-directory information, right? If you do a project for your major, your capstone course or whatever, and ABET needs to know, and we need to show ABET that this particular student met the outcomes necessary for engineering, that's the only way that comes out of Brightspace and in a secure manner goes to the person who's doing the review. In other words, we don't publish that detail on our website, so it's not open to everybody and anybody. In fact, when I provide transcripts for our ABET reviewers, they always go in with a password. So they can't just share that out. You actually have to open it with the password necessary. Then they can look at the particular student's transcript. So I can't even take a chance to transmit via email. Even though I'm just sending it to this person, I would never take a chance to send it to that person in unsecure email without putting a password on it where only that individual knows what that password is. So they have a legitimate reason to see the records. I'm providing it, but I'm also trying to protect all of the students that may be involved in that sharing from any nefarious access to it as it's being transported. That is my job. I mean, I have to do that. So hopefully that clarifies how important it is to make sure FERPA is not violated.
Yeah. You mentioned ABET?
Yes, that's the accreditation for engineering.
And we know that Brightspace and Google Classrooms, although they work with institutions like SUNY Oswego, they are essentially an organization of their own. They have their own softwares and they do their own thing. So how do universities ensure that their partnerships with third-party educational tech companies comply with FERPA, especially regarding data storage, sharing, and ownership? Is there some sort of contract? How does this ensure that students' data are being secured?
It's a really great question. That's very important. Now, on the Brightspace side, this is not true for all applications that would have student records in them. SUNY actually has its own servers, so it's not served in the cloud by Brightspace.
Okay.
We actually, SUNY, the whole state University of New York, shares the opportunity to serve Brightspace. So this is not necessarily a product that is in the hands of Brightspace. It's a product that is in the hands of the State University of New York. Not just SUNY Oswego, but the State University of New York. And of course, we use it for our courses, but as does other universities in the system. So I want to make sure that delineation is clear. Brightspace particularly um, even though it's served, but it's served by the system. It's not served by Brightspace itself. But there are other systems that we use that require maintenance of student information, and they all have elements for accessibility, for FERPA, for everything that we care very deeply about, that they're going to follow the same rules in providing any of it as we would.
Yeah.
So we don't allow them to, and they don't. That's an assumption that we can make, because they would be violating our contract.
Yeah.
If then they turn around and do some kind of a search of some keywords and grab our students' papers that they submitted in their courses. That would be a total violation of FERPA if that type of action is taken, and there would be significant lawsuits if that turns out to be the way that information got out. Unfortunately, I have to say, our students are very public, and I don't mean SUNY Oswego students in the academy, are very public with their opinions, because for a very long time, if you shared that type of information, it didn't really amount to anything. It didn't really turn around and made you some kind of a suspect or whatever. But I think we're in times where going on Facebook and writing things, or going on X and writing things, or any other public context in which the information is then available and open for a web search, scraping of the web, looking for these details, is a problem. I think in all of these instances, it's not the universities that are providing the detail. I'm afraid the students themselves are providing that type of information.
That concludes today's interview.
All right, good luck.
That was all very insightful. I had the opportunity to have an email correspondence with one of the members of the campus IT team at SUNY Geneseo, Rick Colasia, specifically about the Wi-Fi network that the SUNY system, as well as many other institutions across the world, use, called EDU Roam. So he explained that when a person or device authenticates with the EDU Roam wireless network, different things happen based on their location. If the authenticating person or device is at their home institution, their username and password are processed by the wireless network right there on their campus, and a record of the attempt and success status, which is pass or fail, is kept according to that home institution's procedures. If the authenticating user is at a guest institution, their username and password are passed to one of two cloud-hosted servers, which then relay the request, password, and pass or fail status between the guest institution and the user's home institution. The home institution will keep a record of the attempt and the success status according to that institution's procedures.
Interesting.
Yeah, and he wasn't familiar with how long the cloud hosting relay servers may keep a record of their actions processing the exchange, or how long the remote guest institution keeps a record of the connection to their network, but they do all have their own individual and policies. He explained that Geneseo keeps a record of the connection for 1 month, and that the name and location of the device that you're connecting from, if you're on campus, is also saved. If you're off campus, they keep the name of the remote EDU Roam provider, and only IT folks with operational needs will have access to the data, and he emphasized that nobody else does, and that no wireless operators or relay servers keep anyone's password ever. So, with the huge network, it does seem like there's a significant amount of protection.
Okay, that's interesting. So they have access to the data, but like all other information, like your password, not really.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Or some of it they'll just hold for finite amount of time. Seemingly,
Mm-hmm.
Geneseo at least has the policy of 1 month.
Okay, so if I were a SUNY Oswego student to go to Geneseo, they would hold, like, they already know my data because I'm a SUNY student,
Hmm.
basically, is what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay, that's
Yep.
interesting.
Even if you're not at a SUNY institution, they will, when you try to log in at their place, it will be called EDU Roam. You'll see it pop up in your Wi Fi options.
Mhm.
You can click on it, sign in with your Geneseo or Oswego login, and they'll get your password and information. They'll send it over to your institution, and it happens very quickly. Like just while you're
Okay.
standing there. Yeah.
So, are IT professionals on campus, are they also here to protect our data because it's so much of us and it's such a vast amount of data from these hackers and people who can share our information to the public?
Absolutely. I definitely think that they hold the protector position, and that the antagonistic outcomes would be coming from, I think, hackers and people like that. I don't think that this data is being. It's very. There are policies to protect it,
Mhm.
and from abuse from the institution. So it seems like the biggest threats would be hackers.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah. Um, and kind of related to those types of terms of service and policies, you did a little bit more of a look into some of the institutional technologies that we rely on as students, with these kind of learning systems that you're required to use to submit your work. And there are kind of these centralized services. SUNY Oswego uses Brightspace. Um, to organize work, organize classes. Each class has its own Brightspace page. The
Mhm.
professors are able to post assignments and descriptions of the assignments with rubrics, and we're able to turn in our work through that platform,
Yeah.
and even have discussions with each other in there, where we get a prompt and share our thoughts and opinions, sometimes over very controversial topics.
So I just wanted to discuss the terms of services and basically some keywords that popped out. So to begin, one of them is that administrators can set the terms and conditions to have no expiry, and users are only required to accept the terms if new terms and conditions are added. Administrators can set a date or a relative date at which users are prompted to accept the terms and conditions. Administrators can configure which roles are required to review the terms and conditions using the roles and permission tool. So it seems like, in essence, administrators have a lot of control of how students can use Brightspace, which I never knew until researching this kind of information. And in a way, it seems manipulative because it's kind of like we don't know this, but they do. They're kind of like the master behind it. So yeah, what do you think, Sarah?
I do think that it's one of those catch-22 situations where at least they're doing something, and there are permissions being set, for what can happen with student data in Brightspace. I would hope that there is some kind of expiry date at some point instituted, instead of it being indefinite, just because it seems, like as time passes, there's a higher risk of information being accessed by people that you don't want to have it, or the terms and conditions changing, to possibly, maybe being able to one day train AI on the stuff that's
Mm-hmm.
saved in there, that you wouldn't necessarily, when you wrote it, you didn't think that that was something that would be happening. On the other hand, I I'm optimistic that the administrators are taking care of it in a responsible enough manner that they're just taking this big burden off of us, and that it's just working as we want it to and as we hope it would behind the scenes.
Yeah, I agree. And to continue on the last two terms of services that stood out, um, they can also set the website behavior for what happens if a user declines the terms and condition services. Administrators can export terms and condition data to assist and identify which users have accepted or rejected the terms and conditions. Now, I know we had a lot of conversation about this in class
Mm.
too, in Com 527, about, you know, just the fact that if our terms and conditions, we go onto a website and we decline it, um, is there really a catch to it? If we accept it, they're taking our data. But if we decline it, maybe they're not taking as much data as they would want to, but there's some type of they know something within our data that they can still, use for themselves. So I do agree that it's kind of a catch-22 situation. In a way, you would hope that the institution is not using it for just the greater good of selling our data um on their end, of course, not on our end. But also it it creates a question for students of, why are you setting these conditions of seeing what happens if we decline the terms and conditions,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just transitioning, because you spoke about AI just a little
Mm.
bit and like what could the possibilities be for Brightspace? Well, it turns out that Zoom is already using AI within their software. So for their terms of services, they are using customer data for AI training, which includes video recordings, transcripts, shared files. There is no option to opt out of broad data usage, so that grants Zoom's rights over user content. And personally, as a student at SUNY Oswego, I wasn't really aware of the fact that they're using our data for AI training until I think I've seen something on the actual Zoom software that kind of had like this thing in the corner where we're on a call and they had like, but other than that, like I don't think I received the email or anything of these updated terms of services.
Yeah, I was completely unaware of that until I think that Faye, who is also a member of this podcast team, mentioned it in class one time. And I was very disconcerted by the AI training component. And I think that, if I'm not mistaken, there is the option to opt out of the AI usage, and that sometimes the data that you can't opt out of is other data like your password and email and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, but I think it's just like, why aren't they telling us that? It's great that we can opt out, but
Mm.
why aren't you letting us know that, that's a possibility? Why do we have to feel like we have to be a part of this, you know?
Yeah, and you're opted in by default. And an important part in the context of our discussion and at this podcast is that this is actually for a class that is a hybrid course. So most of the only time that the class meets is on Zoom,
Hmm.
except for a couple of times where we've had, group, like individual meetings to work on projects and things like that. So the bulk of the content that we have gone over in this class um, is material that may be used to train AI, which on one hand, it's easy to be like, well, okay, how much is this really an issue? And on the other, I think that it's very concerning because sometimes we have these original ideas that we theoretically could go on to use in our own academic research
Hmm.
or topics. And if it's being used to train AI, especially if it's, a large language model or a chatbot, then our original idea may be used, just even an idea that we stated may be used to inspire someone else when they're asking for brainstorming ideas, because that's a common use of AI. That's one of the
Hmm.
most encouraged uses of AI and like mainstream um, things that you hear people referring to is like as a brainstorming partner. So
Yeah.
I don't know it. And also our images, like what our faces look like when we're talking. I mean, that is just
Yeah.
so invasive.
I agree. I definitely think it kind of expands or increases the whole brainstorm collaborative aspect of AI. I don't think it's just the start of it. I do think it's been there for some years now. I do think
Yeah.
it's just them expanding on it. As I see a lot of other, tech companies are starting to do. But um
Yeah.
on the on the on the discussion of us not being able to know that, or many students not being able to know that we can get ourselves out of this situation. Um, yeah, it reels in so many other concerns.
Moving from the external kind of software that students are using to a more institutional data concern, you did a little bit of a dive into some students who are suing Doge. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, so this is an ongoing current event situation. So as of February 2025, California students sued the education department as they alleged that DOGE, which stands for Department of Government Efficiency, is accessing private data.
Hmm.
So, for those who don't know, the task of DOGE, their goal is to cut federal funding, and this organization within the federal government is led by Trump and Elon Musk. DOGE is an unelected and non-congressionally approved entity. So, um, many, including students, have been accusing DOGE of violating privacy laws and federal regulations by infiltrating computer systems that house students' financial aid information. They were accused of such information because Musk and his team have been allowed to see data sets containing the personal information of students who receive federal financial aid. So these records include National Student Loan Database Systems and the Common Origination and Disbursement System. And overall, the goal of the lawsuit is to prevent those from viewing sensitive education department data. um, yeah, this is very concerning,
Yeah.
especially when it comes to our sensitive information,
Mm.
just forgetting even what's online, what we search, but just our financial information. And to some point, I think it has gotten to a degree of them wanting to know, or the curiosity of viewing social security information.
Yeah.
So yeah, this has become a very important conversation
Yeah.
because, this is important stuff to us. That's our identity.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, FERPA is created to protect that type of data. So to have, it's not as though there isn't some type of precedent set for this being something that's extremely sensitive and taken very seriously, especially because the the colleges, I mean, we're at a state college, they have so much information about us from our health records to our social security numbers, and obviously this is related to like your tax information and what your family's income is, like just beyond the student. It's like the people everyone who's involved with the students are kind of being exposed in this type of deep dive into government spending.
Yes, I totally agree. Luckily, as of April 30th, 2025, a federal appeals court rejected the Trump's administration's bid to lift an order blocking the US Social Security Administration from giving Elon Musk's access to millions of Americans' data. So, while that has happened, it is possible for the US Supreme Court to intervene by the request of the Trump administration.
I think that's all we have for tonight.
All right. Thank you for tuning in to episode 3 of Data U, a Laker led dive into student surveillance. Now to Joe and Tyler, who are discussing the business of student data.